Hello humans, it's your host Kory, and this week we're going to do something a little bit different. So I have been working on producing the audiobook version of my book, A Well Cared For Human. So this is based on the keynotes that I give. This is based on more of my public appearances. There's a lot of the topics from the book that we've covered in the 140 something episodes of this podcast that we have had at this point. But this is the most organized version of that. And so I have been trying to get the audiobook version done, edited, out into the world for you guys, because I know that if you are a podcast listener, you probably also do prefer audiobooks. And so it just is very time consuming. But I have been really committed to getting that done. It's one of my 2026 resolutions is to have it completely recorded, edited, and published out into the world by the end of the month. And so I am on the way to doing that. So far, so good. I've recorded the first 3 chapters. There are 12 chapters in all. And I will show on the Patreon, for those of you who are a patron, I'll show you the behind the scenes of where I do the recording in my little audio closet and what that setup looks like. But for today's episode, because it's kind of hard to produce new content for the show and then also be trying to work on the audiobook at the same time, I thought that instead of taking another hiatus or a break, I would just share parts of the audiobook with you in lieu of the kind of spontaneous or sporadic content that I usually have been doing. And so this first week, I'm going to share with you chapter 1, which is now done. It's about 19 and a half minutes, all said and done. And so it'll be about the normal length of a podcast episode, but I'll still keep doing the visual intros, outros, but there's no visual for the middle part. And so I haven't actually decided. I will know once I start editing this episode that I'm going to post if I'm going to use photos or maybe just a blank screen with the transcript, a kind of scrolling on it so that you can see like the captions, I guess, as you're listening, because some people, they need that extra, the captioning to make it easier to listen. So I'll put that part on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts, none of this means anything to you. It'll just seem like a normal episode. But I actually am sharing the first chapter of the audiobook. And so what you need to know about this audiobook chapter in order to enjoy it, absolutely nothing, because it's the opening of a book. And so usually those are pretty self-explanatory. But it does share kind of the how I ended up on this path, what happened with my mom. It's very narrative, the introductory chapter. And so I do hope that you enjoy that. And I would also just love your feedback on how you felt the audiobook chapter read, because I am not a professional audiobook narrator. It's a very different vibe than just getting on a podcast and saying what you want to say, because my podcast episodes, in case you didn't know, they're very spontaneous. I don't really have scripts. There's nothing that I'm really reading. I'm just sharing my thoughts on a particular topic or idea, often provided by you guys. Like you say, can you tell me something about this, or tell me about your experience with this? And then I just turn on my mic and I get to it. And so it's very different than trying to read something that I have written. And I did not love having to read aloud in class as a kid. And so I don't know how this is going to go. But I'm curious to see what you guys thought about it, if it's good enough to enjoy. Hopefully my reading voice is not too annoying. And so give me your comments, your feedback on that. Otherwise, if you enjoy that, for the next couple of episodes, it probably will be excerpts from the audiobook, just so that, again, I can have that overlay in the production time, because I'm very wrapped up in trying to get the book done. But the content and information, hopefully you will also find very valuable, because that is what the whole book is for. And so I hope that you enjoy it. I look forward to hearing what you guys think. And thank you so much for listening to the episode. And I'll see you on the other side. Chapter 1. A Mother's Murder. A Daughter's Salvation. Triumphant stories are usually only triumphant because of their losses. Hardship always precedes the win. The low always comes before the high. Hope is lost before faith can be restored. Otherwise, what is there to triumph over? Most people assume my greatest loss came when my mother was murdered, and as heartbreaking as that experience was, that is not where my story begins. But wait, isn't this supposed to be an inspirational book? A motivational book about how anything is possible? Yes, that's certainly the goal. But then why are we talking about loss and murdered mothers? Because I want to show you how to leverage your losses. Not only how to navigate the heartbreak and fallout of life's challenges more easily, but also how you can use the opening your loss created to transform your situation, your problems, and more importantly, yourself. How does loss create an opening? Because it detaches us from that which we were previously bound, a person, a job, a place, a dream, a most desperate desire. We usually don't like this detachment, not one bit. But that doesn't change the fact that once we are dislodged, we are now free to forge something new. When my mother died, a door certainly slammed shut in my face. I had to say goodbye to a few dreams. The dream that life would ever get better for her, the dream that things could ever get better between us, that it would be safe to see her more frequently, to spend more time with her. I imagined often the day when I was wealthy enough to buy her a house and the round-the-clock care and supervision she needed, when I'd finally have the means to get her away from her destructive family. 14 years before, a homicide detective called me to ask if my uncle had a history of violence against her. It was a hospital that had called to give me bad news. "There's been an accident," they said. I was a student at the time, taking summer classes because I was trying to finish my graduate degree more quickly. I was also hoping to make up for the time I'd lost as a struggling undergraduate, trying to survive. What had I been trying to survive? The chaos of my family, certainly. My mother was diagnosed as bipolar, and as a result she was unpredictable. Her behavior was erratic, and she would disappear altogether sometimes. She drank too much, used drugs. There were her bouts in jail and the repetitious, heart-crushing news that some man had left her black and blue and bleeding on my grandmother's doorstep once again, or that once re-welcomed inside, my uncle had continued where the other had left off. Apart from my mother's self-destruction, I was also surviving the spin-off of my own traumatic childhood and all the bad habits it had created within me. I was too scared to get hooked on drugs and alcohol, though I'd done plenty of both. The real addiction in my teens and 20s had been codependent love affairs. There was also the depression and anxiety so thick that I would spend entire days in my bed or on the couch forgetting to eat or drink or to even bathe. Like many traumatized kids, I was also surviving the bondage of shame, half hanging myself with it on most days, a shame so lovingly nurtured by a narcissistic father until it was propagating like weeds in the garden in high July, no longer requiring any effort from him to grow. I was surviving work stress, school stress, and little or not so little betrayals by so-called friends. Not to mention all the torment of being on your own at 23 and having no idea what a quarter-life crisis is because you have, in fact, spent every single day of your life in crisis. And you simply call this latest emergency a Tuesday. By the time I had reached graduate school, at least I knew I wanted to be a writer. I had a dream, something to focus on besides the hurricane in my head trying to unravel me from the inside out. I was eating. A lot of ice cream from Dairy Queen next door to my duplex, granted, but I was eating, and I was starting to see progress. I was just starting to relax. Until I got this call that my mother was dying in a hospital. There's been an accident. She's coming out of surgery now, and we don't know if she'll make it. How soon can you get here? I drove like a demon to Nashville, which was about an hour away from where I was going to school. I prayed the whole way there. Please don't let her die. Please don't let her die. Please don't. Please, please. At the time, my relationship with God was about as healthy as my relationship with my mother, but old habits die hard. By the time I arrived, she was out of surgery. They had moved her to the ICU. When I walked in, her room was dark. All the lights turned down low. Only the one behind her bed shone, backlighting her like a saint. Her bandaged head was wrapped up like a smashed thumb beneath 20 layers of gauze. There was a tube draining the blood away from her brain, and I looked at that tube for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I couldn't tell if the blood was coming or going. My mother was awake, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't answer typical questions like, who is the president? Do you know what month it is? Do you know who this is? When the nurse pointed to me, my mother only smiled. Afterward, the doctor pulled me aside. What happened to her? I had a lot of guesses, none of them great. Maybe it was another boyfriend or girlfriend that had left her like this. Maybe she'd drank too much, or had been too high and had gotten behind the wheel of a car. Or maybe she'd been perfectly sober, but her dark mind had said, drive right into that concrete barrier there, Lisa. And she had. Sometimes my mother listened to such voices. I remember how tired the doctor looked, the puffiness of his dark eyes. We only have what the police report says and the eyewitness testimony, but it seems like your uncle struck her so hard in the head with something, it actually broke her skull, he said. I would find out later that it requires hundreds of pounds of force to break a skull, and my uncle had somehow accomplished this with a glass ashtray. The doctor went on. We were able to do the surgery and repair the damage. We put a steel plate in her head, but as you can see, she's going to need to go to a rehabilitation facility after this in order to relearn how to walk, how to talk, regain the functionality that she's lost due to this brain injury. I burst into tears at some point. I felt bad about that. Tears didn't stop me from initiating strategy mode, though. Before the good doctor even finished explaining the situation, I had already begun mapping a path toward resolution, seeking a viable way forward, turning the problem over in my mind like a puzzle box meant to be solved. This incident, the phone call, the bad news, the dropping everything and rushing to her side, had triggered a long-ingrained pattern in me, what I call savior mode. That constant fear for her safety and the crushing weight that somehow it was my responsibility to keep her safe was familiar. I'd carried that belief close to my heart since I was a little girl. A belief reinforced every time I stepped between my mother and whoever her assailant was, when I hid her keys or her pills, when I'd invented so many little versions of the keep mommy safe game. And not just her physical safety either. I considered her emotional well-being and her happiness my responsibility too. If I found her crying, or if I knew she was sad, I always tried to cheer her up. It was a lot of work for a child, given that she was bipolar and her moods were frequently unstable. So when the doctor sat across from me in a sterile room and told me what he thought had happened, and what needed to happen next, I did what I'd always done. I left the hospital that night and immediately began rearranging my life so that I could take care of her. It didn't matter that having my mother come and live with me didn't make any sense, financially or otherwise. I was compelled by my one overwhelming desire to keep my mother safe. I asked my roommate to move out so I could have the spare room, which was a terrible financial decision. I asked my professors to work with me on deadlines, showing how quickly I forgot about my academic priorities. And I asked my job to be flexible in my scheduling, and was almost fired for it. I tried to get friends to agree to check on her when I was at work or school, because now I had a new fear that with her brain injury she might get confused and wander into traffic and get hit by a car. Maybe she'd even be lured by the very enticing light of the Dairy Queen sign, as I so often was. I was trying to find a bed for her, curtains, drawers for her clothes. When I went to the store to buy myself things like shampoo or conditioner or food, I started making decisions based on her preferences. Maybe she'll like this. Oh, she definitely would hate that. I wanted her to feel welcome. More importantly, I had plans. Plans for how this time would be different. This time was my big chance to get my mother out of my grandmother's house, where she'd been living with her violent brother before the accident. Away from the drinking, the drugs. This would be the fresh start and the new life I had always wanted for her. I got carried away with the dreams of what our relationship could be like if she just got better. That maybe, just maybe, this brain injury would prove to be a blessing in disguise. We'd have the relationship I'd always wanted, a safe one. A stable one in which she was the mother and I got to be the child. I was already fully committed to these delusions by the time a second phone call came a few weeks later. This one was from the rehabilitation clinic that she'd been moved into after the hospital. She was supposed to stay for a minimum of 6 weeks in the facility, relearning how to walk, how to talk. At 6 weeks, they were going to reassess her progress and see if she needed a longer stay. By then, I was hoping to have my place sorted, so she didn't have to go back to my grandmother's even for a single night. But it had not yet been 6 weeks when a very distressed woman from the facility called, apologizing as if she'd accidentally set my mother on fire. "She's gone," she said. "She had some guests, and when we went to go check on her, she was just gone. She took off her wristband and she slipped out against medical advice." In a perfectly normal, perfectly calm voice, I thanked the woman for letting me know. I waited until after we said our goodbyes to panic. I called everyone I could think of. I drove to Nashville and checked all the places she could have possibly been, bars, dealers, friends. I couldn't find her. Do you know where she was? Do you know where I finally found her once the panic wore off and I began to think clearly? You might think I'm stupid when I tell you. After all, it would have made sense to call my grandmother's house first. She had been living there at the time of the accident, and is where my uncle had caved in her skull and almost killed her weeks before. So why hadn't I checked there first? Because I had believed her. Every day that I had visited my mother in the rehabilitation clinic, I'd sat with her and we'd made plans about how our lives would be once she came home with me. We'd spent hours of each visit making these plans, so I'd believed her when she'd said, "Of course I don't want to go back to Nana's. Of course I don't want to be in the same house with that bastard. I only stay there because I have nowhere else to go." "But now you do have somewhere else to go," I'd told her. "And now I do," she'd agreed. Except she'd escaped the facility and returned to my grandmother's house. She'd abandoned her treatment halfway through just to go back there. My uncle, the most violent and dangerous of my mother's abusers, had been waiting for her, ready to offer his usual pathetic run of half-hearted apologies. You might think that finding my mother back at my grandmother's house just weeks after she'd almost died should have been enough for me to give up on my mom, but it wasn't. Back then I had a much higher tolerance for misery. Now, not so much. Instead, I drove over there and called her from the end of the driveway because I couldn't even go into the house, not with him there. My uncle had assaulted me once, on the day of my grandfather's funeral. He'd reached out to choke me and had missed but broken my sunglasses across the bridge of my nose. I ran to a neighbor's house. They called the police, and off to jail he went. I never set foot in my grandmother's house again. I do learn some lessons more quickly than others. I called my grandmother's landline from the driveway with my little Nokia flip phone. With my mother on the phone, I said, "If you still want to get out of here, if you still want to go somewhere else, I'll take you with me now. You can still come live with me. Isn't that what you want?" "Yes," she said again. I just had nowhere else to go. As she slid into the passenger seat with her shaved head and all 64 staples in the shape of a question mark visible on the side of her skull, I remembered how I'd shaved off the last of her beautiful hair in the bathroom adjacent to the little rehab suite. How she'd cried, even though she had been the one to ask me to do it. And now here she was, bald, with that terrifying line of pinched skin. But at least she was in my car, and not in that house with him. "Can we make one stop before we get on the highway?" she asked. I assumed that she needed cigarettes. She'd been a smoker all of my life. She loved to tell the story about how the only time she'd quit smoking was when she was pregnant with me. And when you came out and the nurse asked if I wanted to breastfeed, I told her, "Hell no, give me a damn cigarette." But it had been worth it, baby. Because look at you, you're perfect. So it wasn't a surprise, this request. And I stopped at the nearest gas station and my mom went in, but she didn't come out with cigarettes. She came out with beer. This was a problem. This was a problem for so many reasons. Did she forget about the medication she was supposed to be taking for her injured brain? Did she forget about her failing liver, thanks to the hepatitis C she contracted from intravenous drug use in the 90s? It wasn't even about the promise that she had made me at the rehab, that of course she'll quit drinking, she hasn't even wanted to have a drink since she woke up from surgery, that this was the fresh start she had always prayed for. It was the fact that I had one objective: to keep her safe. I was wrestling with my lifelong desire to keep her safe, and here she was, sitting next to me in my car with 64 staples punched into the side of her head, opening a beer while looking me dead in the eyes. In this moment, I was confronted with the possibility that the person hurting my mother the most in the world was herself. And how do we protect someone from themselves? We can't. And I'll say it again, louder for those of you in the back, or for those of you who learn as quickly as I do some of our most heartbreaking lessons. It can't be done. We cannot protect people from themselves. This truth is one of the most painful I have ever had to accept. If you drink that beer, it's going to kill you, I told her. Don't be so dramatic, she said, and opened the beer. This won't last me 2 days. She started to drink it. And here it is, the pivotal moment, my chance to make a decision that would change everything. Until that moment, I had believed that if I just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, did enough, planned enough, fought enough, was enough, I could make my mother safe. That I could get the relationship I wanted with her. I'm willful and I'm stubborn and more than a little idealistic, but everyone has a limit. And here in this moment, I had found mine. Watching her open that beer, so close on the heels of her brush with death, incinerated my delusions. Loss can do that. It was abundantly clear that my options were to stay in this codependent dance with her, trying to achieve the impossible, force salvation upon her, or I could choose to break the cycle. I could choose, for the first time in my life, to save the only person I actually could, myself. And that's what I did. In my sweltering, beat-up clunker of a car with less than $20 to my name, that is what I chose. Me. I drove my mother back to my grandmother's house and I left her there at the end of the driveway. Then I threw the car into reverse and drove back to the life I was desperately and very imperfectly trying to build. I had wanted to weave my mother into the fabric of my new life, but could now see that that was never going to happen. That dream was slipping like sand through my fingers as I drove away despite the crushing fear that I was leaving her there to die. I knew that if I left her there, in that house, with that man, it was only a matter of time before he killed her. After all, he had come so close this time, and it wasn't like I was wrong, because 14 years later, almost to the day, I got a phone call from a homicide detective telling me that he was arresting my uncle, that he believed my uncle was responsible for my mother's death. Do I even need to tell you that I blamed myself? Do I need to even speak of the guilt that threatened to consume me whole when I found out that she had died the way she died? I shared the story of her death, the investigation and the family secrets uncovered in the wake of that experience in the Who Killed My Mother podcast, which later became a book. So I won't tell that story again here. But what I will say is that my mother's death was a great loss. And as with every loss, I was cracked wide open by it. All the hope poured out, and after it did so, new paths and possibilities were born of my grief. You already know what your losses are. Like me, I'm sure you carry them quite close to your chest. We're here to talk about what you can do next. When these openings present themselves, you have options, choices, for how you want to leverage all that loss and heartache. So no, this book isn't about loss, not really. I will share my losses for one reason and one reason only, to prove that it can get bad as it can possibly get, and you can still set yourself free. This book is about triumph and a path that we can take to get there. Everyone's path is different, of course, but if we're lucky, and I believe we are, this book will serve as a field guide to your well-being. If nothing else, I hope it will be a bit of comfort on an especially cold and unforgiving day. So if you're ready, please allow me to show you where the path back to yourself begins. Key chapter takeaways. We cannot save someone from themselves, no matter how much we love them. As terrible as loss is, it will always create openings and new possibilities. These openings are precious opportunities for transformation, and it's our choice how to make the most of them. No matter what has happened to us, no matter how tragic, we can always find our way back to ourselves. And that's it, dear human. That was chapter 1, the introductory chapter of my book, A Well Cared For Human. I hope that you enjoyed it, that you found it useful. The next chapters that we share in the weeks going forward, they will be more like our typical podcast episode in which I break down a certain idea or a concept, and so I hope that you will find those valuable as well. If I'm not mistaken, the next chapter is the longer one. It's like 40 something minutes. And so let me know what you guys thought about this one, if you enjoyed it, if you thought the production quality was okay enough for it to be an audiobook, because again, I had to make the executive decision about whether or not it was better to have someone else read it or if it was better to do it in my own voice and produce it myself. And so feel free to validate my choices or not, or tell me I made a mistake. In either case, I look forward to hearing from you guys and any input that you have for me. And I will be back next time with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you.